When it comes to understanding the impact of AI on Africans or just African countries more broadly, the evidence is honestly still mixed. A lot of the focus when it comes to Africa, and again, also LMICs more broadly, is really trying to understand how AI can help augment and maybe even in some cases accelerate pressing development problems. And so we do see lots of like AI in healthcare, AI in agriculture particularly. Also AI in education is starting to like rise up a little bit. I would say it's really more so AI is having an impact at the fundamental level in Africa versus, let's say, like this personal leisure that we see in like other Western quote unquote countries.
Welcome to Season 2 of Our Long Walk, a podcast series about South Africa's past, present and future. I'm Johan Fourie from Stellenbosch University, and as always, I'm joined by Wits University's brilliant Jonathan Schoots.
With Johan's expertise in economic history and my expertise in historical sociology, we are excited to interview world-leading academics who ask compelling questions about our country, our continent, and the ideas shaping the world around us.
Chinasa T. Okolo is the founder of TechnoCultura and an AI governance researcher focused on the global majority. She recently completed a PhD in computer science at Cornell, where she studied how non-expert users engage with AI systems, and now serves as an AI and emerging technologies policy specialist at the United Nations. Welcome, Chinasa. It's wonderful to have you here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are very excited to speak to a computer scientist. I must say, Jonathan also has a minor, is it Jonathan, in computer science?
Undergrad.
Okay. Chinasa, I'm going to ask a very basic question. I typically don't do this, but I suspect that our audience is relatively aware of the massive developments in AI. But assuming that they're not, assuming that they're a first year undergraduate student and they've only played around with ChatGPT, what is artificial intelligence and what is it that it will do to our lives, both in terms of productivity, in terms of work lives, but also social, cultural? To set the scene, please.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a great question. And so just to start, artificial intelligence is basically a field of computer science that aims to make machines like computers, phones, and other devices think and behave, and I have this in quotes, like humans to perform tasks like learning, problem solving, identification, planning, reasoning, and even decision making. More broadly, these are classified into three main buckets. So we have predictive, which has actually been in play for about a couple of decades now. So these include like recommendation systems and even just like systems that make basic decisions about how you even, I don't know, interact in daily life or even how you also just like navigate digital technologies more broadly. And then we have generative AI, which, most people now know as like what AI pretty much is. It's only just a small part of actually what AI can do. And then now we're starting to actually see a lot of work focus on this newer form of AI called agentic AI, which actually kind of wraps up both predictive and generative all into one to really focus on this autonomous nature of doing things like identification, planning, reasoning, and decision making more broadly. When it comes to the impact on our daily lives, I think once 2022 happened, November, when ChatGPT started basically kicking things off, we saw how it really changed like people individually, but even just so like careers. And I think this is where the heart of the conversation will lie when it comes to understanding the impact on labor and how it's changing work at scale.
And again, a very simple question, but TechnoCultura works at AI governance. So what does governance mean in this context?
So governance is a little bit more broad and not, I would say, as strict as regulation or policies, and includes other, let's say, like soft law mechanisms like frameworks or just generally mechanisms to help us understand how we can have effective and robust oversight of AI technologies. And a lot of my work is focused, on this respective topic of governance, trying to understand particularly how African countries and also those across the global majority regions or low and middle income countries, as economists like to say, to really understand how we can ensure that AI is governed correctly and also does not cause a lot of harm.
This is a wonderful setup, and I want to just jump in with a very broad question. You are one of a number of field leading authors on this paper titled AI and the Future of Work in Africa, and you've already mentioned this. I wanted to ask, how do you see AI reshaping the future of work in Africa, and what are the opportunities and pitfalls for the global south, for Africa in particular, and how do we latch onto these key opportunities while identifying and avoiding some of these pitfalls that you've talked about in your work?
Oh, yeah, so another great question. I was very happy to be part of the collaboration. I'm actually also doing some work at the World Bank now. And a lot of our work really shows that when it comes to AI in Africa, and also even like other low and middle income regions, that AI is more likely to augment work than actually replace workers. And so I think this is good, but also there's also a lot of lack of clarity in terms of what kind of work it would actually augment. Obviously, there are researchers in Africa. I know you are two of them, and there are lots of academic institutions across the continent as well engaging in work that can be easily automated or, I guess, obviously augmented by AI. When it comes to, let's say, like farm work, more manual work, labor, cooking, obviously, even like in Western quote unquote countries, this is something that AI has been less likely or able to actually replace as well. And so I do see this impact happening. But when it comes to, let's say, like white collar work at scale, these systems are not as contextually relevant. But basically, when it comes to like culture, values, language, then I think this also plays a role in basically how AI systems will actually impact the African continent and also other regions too.
Yeah, great. This comment about contextually relevant, I think you've done a lot of work exploring what does it mean for AI to be put to work, but also what data is it trained on and all these kinds of things. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that contextual relevance, how we bring about more contextual relevance, but also then what are the pitfalls that happen when it's not contextually relevant? In what ways might these global majority countries be left behind?
Yeah, great question. And I had the chance to write about this for the International AI Safe Report for the interim and inaugural versions that were published in 2025 and 2024. Basically, when it comes to the issues of bias and underrepresentation, you basically have these downstream impacts where you're causing harm onto mostly marginalized communities. And then also, people just generally have a worse experience interacting with these respective technologies. They may be also exposed to mis and disinformation that is produced by generative AI technologies. And when it comes to the predictive side of things, they may have decisions made on their livelihoods that shouldn't have happened in the first place. And so it's really, a big impact on the consumers or end users themselves. But then also, I think it just provides less opportunity for people to actively engage with AI systems and really, let's say, extricate the benefits from them as well.
I know that the World Bank, you mentioned the World Bank now, and I'm not entirely sure what you are doing with the World Bank, but
No
they are
worries.
working on a World Bank report on AI and development.
Yes, and I'm actually contributing to that report,
Okay, so
yes.
that's wonderful. So I'm not sure what you're allowed to reveal, and if you're not allowed to reveal anything, then please say so.
Sure.
I was thinking about how would AI affect African countries, let's say sub-Saharan African countries, differently than other places in the world. We do have quite a unique set of institutions. Perhaps sometimes uniqueness is overemphasized, but still, I do think that they are both in terms of the informal institutions, culture, trust, all of these things that one might think of, somewhat different given also our history. And then even formal institutions, we're at a different place in development. We're mostly still agricultural compared to other places in the world. So how would one think about the impact of AI in Africa differently to, say, other perhaps even countries of similar income levels, but with a different set of institutions?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I would talk about some of the stuff I'm doing at the World Bank. As previously hinted, I am also doing some work on the World Development Report. I think it's very nice that I came in at a year that the WDR focuses on AI. And so I actually been doing some work on really providing these basic definitions of different AI terms, but also really trying to understand what the current state of research shows, particularly in terms of evidence for AI impacts or even like success in low and middle income countries. And so I would say when it comes to understanding the impact of AI on Africans or just African countries more broadly, I would say the evidence is honestly still mixed. When we consider even like these Western contexts, I'm based in the US, the economic benefits of AI have really only trickled down, let's say more so to the infrastructure companies. And so when it comes to actually having, let's say, a significant impact on GDP or even just generally on like individuals and their respective incomes, the evidence is honestly not there. So I honestly expect to see similar impacts happening in Africa. But I think that because a lot of the focus when it comes to Africa, and again, also LMICs more broadly, is really trying to understand how AI can help augment and maybe even in some cases accelerate these pressing development problems. And so, because there hasn't been a lot of progress, again, particularly in Africa as well. And so, we do see lots of AI in healthcare, AI in agriculture, particularly. Also, AI in education is starting to rise up a little bit. In my personal individual research, I actually track AI startups in Africa, and we see a lot of companies focus on like AI and fraud detection. Lots of telecom companies like adapting AI for like
Mm,
in-house chatbots and just to increase communications with customers. And then again, also, as I mentioned, this AI in agriculture,
mm,
really trying to help farmers access information and get connected to better logistics and
mm,
everything else as well.
mm.
So
Mm,
I would say it's really more so AI is having an impact at the fundamental level in Africa versus, let's say,
mm,
like this personal leisure that we
Yeah,
see in like other Western quote unquote
yeah.
countries.
mm,
So maybe just a follow up then. Do you see that these entrepreneurs using AI, you're referring to firms, these might be small firms, larger firms,
Yes.
are they servicing local markets or are they trying to export these
mm,
services to rich world consumers?
Yeah, I would say honestly, the focus is still very much so on local markets. When we see,
Mm,
consider the landscape of natural language processing startups and just like initiatives in
mm,
Africa, they're
mm,
really focused on these low resource languages and trying
mm,
to,
mhm,
let's say, focus on like languages like Ewe and Igbo and,
mm,
others, Amharic, for example, that are very much so underrepresented
mm,
in these, let's say, like mainstream frontier AI models.
mm,
And, a lot of these companies are actually like adding support for, let's say, languages like Swahili or
mm,
Yoruba. But even then, they don't work as well as some of
mm,
these like smaller or like more local methods that have emerged like from
mm,
grassroots efforts across the African
mm,
continent as well. I think there is an opportunity because speakers of these languages, African languages, exist outside the continent. And so I think there's an opportunity to leverage that into different services, sell APIs to these frontier companies or other like larger tech companies to really just help diversify their efforts too.
I find this conversation about kind of low resource languages and tools really interesting. Some of my own work is in historical Xhosa text and then what tools are available to work with this. And I'm a user, but I'm watching these tools be built, but they do lag behind. And I perceive as, oh, the tools aren't there yet, so something is missing. But I want to kind of ask a double barrel question. Kind of one, I think what you hinted to is some of these tools are being adapted from, they were built for English, they're being adapted now, it's catching up. Is that the right way to go? In one of your papers, you have this quote where you talk about 52.1% of all web content on the internet is estimated to be in English. And then you have Spanish, German, Russian, and Japanese, each around 4 to 5%. And so you've got a certain kind of density of knowledge representation around English and much less digital text in these languages, where of course people are speaking these languages, the knowledge is encoded in these languages in all sorts of ways. What do we do with that? Because the other side is the kind of knowledge of African people encoded into AIs? Could it be encoded into AIs? Is that something that we want? Or is it enough to say this is like a superpowered internet? And the internet was always Western skewed, but still it's good for African people to have access to these kinds of powerful knowledge tools. What do you think about that?
I think there's a little mix of both. There are a significant number of Africans that do speak English and let's say like other Romance languages like French or Portuguese,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
example.
yeah.
In some cases, Spanish and in some of the smaller countries as well. But I think it's just important really to have your language represented, especially your native languages like represented in the tools that you use
Mhm,
in your daily life. And I think like we still see issues just generally, as you mentioned, with this language representation on the actual internet. And this
mhm,
actually does have different impacts on different users. In some cases, my colleagues have done like lots of interesting research showing how like content moderation impacts people differently because
mhm,
a lot of these automated systems assume their content in low resource languages is of ill or mild intent. And they get, their
mhm,
WhatsApps or their Facebook account shut down, which is actually like a source of their livelihoods or just
mhm,
generally community or companionship as well. And so when it comes to like how AI systems are is essentially exacerbating these existing issues with language representation on the internet, I think value is also a really big part of it as
mhm,
well. Again, having this not more than language, but having this context specific information. Like, for example, the average person in, let's say, the African continent or even, Latin America, Asia does not need to know what the capital of like Arizona is. And I've said this before, like if I'm a Nigerian student trying to study for the bar and I
Mm,
want to like leverage this AI tool, or I'm a South African student or Brazilian student,
mm,
like I would love to have that information encoded into ChatGPT. And
mm,
there's a lot of different benchmarks that are focused on like evaluating the capabilities of these systems. But
mm.
again, they focus on the American bar exam, the American like medical exam, and other like standardized exams. And I would say basically homogenizes like what
Yeah,
human thought and expression can be, but also doesn't really truly show the value of like different
mm,
ideas and ways of thinking too.
yeah.
I wonder to what extent the adoption of more oral tools, right? So these like whisper, monologue, there's a couple of these that are focused on interacting with these tools orally. So do you think that's actually going to, it seems like that would be a wonderful way to expand the corpus of knowledge, partly because typing and having everything written down is expensive and it takes time. Whereas if these tools now allow a much bigger market, you might be much easier be able to access this kind of knowledge base that you referred to.
Mm,
Yeah, I think voice is definitely the way to go, particularly within, let's say,
mm,
again, low and middle income countries. There's an existing evidence base that shows, particularly when it comes to like information and communication technologies for development research, ICTD, that there's been a lot of work done on these interactive voice applications. And they've
mm,
actually shown a lot of success, particularly in regions where literacy is low.
mm,
And I think that this definitely has to be adopted or adapted into
yeah.
AI applications that are built for these regions as well.
I've had this kind of general picture from the conversation that's going on in the media that there's an effort to build a artificial general intelligence, which is, oh, we build an intelligence that will fit to multiple different problems. And just as you were talking now about certain kinds of content moderation at different values, are we also perhaps unthinkingly building a kind of artificial general intelligence with the kind of idea that knowledge is somehow general? Is there any sense that knowledge might be localized in different ways in different places, and that what knowledge is important would be different? And is there a way out of that? Do we have models trained on different sets of data, or we have alignment happening in different spaces? Or do you have thoughts about what it means when, as exactly as you say, the knowledge is both made and evaluated in a kind of Western and often really American context? How do we think about that?
Yeah, when it comes to how these frontier AI companies are basically conducting work towards AGI, in my opinion, the idea of artificial intelligence being general is basically a farce. And I think one, because I don't want to say it's impossible to encode all sorts of knowledge into these systems, but honestly, like in a way it is. We even
Mm,
like within Western context, we have knowledge that's like deep in archives that will likely never
mm,
be exposed to AI systems. And then
mm,
when it comes to these low and middle income contexts, where a lot of this knowledge, even let's say 4 or 5 years of this development taking place, still hasn't been encoded into AI models. And
mm,
so maybe these tools are, let's say, like generally intelligent for Western context, but when it
mm,
comes to the rest of the world, again, we still have this very limited understanding or
mm,
just encapsulation of knowledge as well. And I think that's why I'm really in favor of these grassroots efforts happening across Africa, across Latin America, across Southeast Asia to focus on developing tools for their languages. And then also like when it comes to the actual like technical specifications or just capabilities of these models, as AI models scale in size, they also scale in the ability to increase harm and also spread and disinformation.
mm,
And they actually don't necessarily become as effective as you think. And in the African context, where the majority of consumers actually access the internet and other digital technologies through their cell phones, often which are
mm,
not smartphones, we need to have these small, like localized, context specific models that can actually meet the needs of consumers and don't try to do like everything all at once.
mm,
So on that point, then economists. So I have to put my economist hat on here. It's like we care about where value is created and where rents are captured. So if African countries do not want to remain stuck basically at the bottom of the AI value chain, where should they push first? Is it that they need to invest in compute? Is it talent, regulation, local data sets? You kind of refer to that. Or is it kind of sector specific applications? What would you advise?
Yeah, so I definitely say it's a mix of all the four things that you mentioned so far. even though we have this large population of youth, they don't necessarily have the skills that are relevant for engaging in AI model development that will actually provide significant value. And also, many African countries are at least 15 to 20 years away from actively actually being involved in manufacturing of GPUs or just even the chips
Mm.
for that. I mean, there's also just a monopoly on chip production anyway,
Mm.
particularly like in the Netherlands as well, but that's a whole nother thing.
Mm.
But I think model development is the key to actually unlocking more value rather than where we see Africans have been relegated to the data labeling or content moderation, which, is actually very expensive in aggregate. But again, these economic benefits of outsourcing have not necessarily had, let's say, impactful impacts on GDP
Mm.
or just
Mm.
generally even individuals themselves who are involved in data labeling as well.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so we have to like focus on building these and expanding tertiary programs, particularly masters and PhDs to
Mm.
help train this specific knowledge. And then also again, like expanding research, expanding like R&D to actually produce
Mm.
companies, startups that can actually help employ people but also again provide this novel innovation in AI systems
Mm.
that I think is really missing in the African context.
So I want to come back to your work on governance, and you have this book chapter called Governance of AI-Based Algorithms. I just want to kind of start with one piece here. You talk about a human-centered AI governance, which emphasizes the need for AI systems to be interpretable, inclusive, and subject to oversight mechanisms that hold developers and organizations accountable for their impact. So could you tell us a little bit about what human-centric AI governance means, and how do we start thinking about how we ought to govern and regulate AI usage?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say it's really focused on not trying to adapt or adopt these existing like large frameworks, let's say like the EU AI Act, and just trying to implement it as blanket regulation in
Mm,
African context or again even other contexts as well
mm,
because the way that let's say like people in higher income countries use AI is much different from how like AI is used in low and middle income countries and even just generally like the scale of development and deployment also really differs and also will actually like impact how AI needs to be regulated in the first place. And so I think that when it comes to African countries, there's also a strong need to really strengthen existing legislation. 44 out of 55 AU member states actually already have data protection laws in place, which is great. We would love to see all 55 AU member states adopt and implement them. But again, a lot of these laws were actually put in place and obviously before ChatGPT came out, and then also haven't necessarily been updated to understand the nuances that AI has brought to this domain. And then even, other domains like labor, for example, in Africa, we haven't seen any country, I would say Kenya is starting to like look into this a little bit, but really start to regulate this AI mediated labor or basically, let's say like data labor and other things as well. And so that's a big concern because that's honestly like the biggest way that most Africans will actually enter into the AI field. And so we have to have sufficient regulation on this. And also, again, like understanding, going back to the previous question, is that like African countries need to adopt AI in ways that align with existing priorities. For many countries, oil is still a very big focus. I've talked about Angola a lot. They just built a very large center from their national oil company, Sinangol, that's focused on expanding like careers in these like petrochemical, geochemical domains. And I don't know if AI is a big focus of that, but AI can actually augment a lot of that
Mm.
work to help expand oil production, maybe even more sustainably, and also help increase, let's say, GDP in a way. And I think that
Mm.
for other countries, let's say that focus on like tea or coffee or just generally like agriculture exports or countries that focus on tourism, there's a way to align
Mm.
AI with those national priorities and
mm,
also even AI regulation as well.
mm,
Chinasa, I just came from a class, an economic history class, where we discussed papers. So the theme of this class was technology,
yeah,
very appropriately. And so we had a couple of papers all about like new technologies and how that shaped labor market outcomes. In the last two we discussed, the first was on the telephone operator, basically in the US in the 1930s, and now specifically female, because that was mostly a female dominated industry, how telephone operators disappeared once automation came in. And the second paper was also about female labor market outcomes, was about milkmaids in Norway and how it's a very recent paper, a top published journal, where, as you see, dairy production being automated, so milking automated, women having to move to the cities to find jobs. Now, the interesting thing about this, in both cases, they found negative impacts in the short run. But the Norway paper is pretty interesting because it shows it can actually track these women decades later, they find that those places that first adopted automated milking, that those women are much more likely to have better life outcomes later on. We've recently had an interview with Alessandra Voena from Stanford, who's all about thinking about the role of women in the household. So, broad question to ask you about the gender impact of AI. What would we expect to see when AI is rapidly adopting? There will be
Mhm.
labor market disruptions. What do you
Yes.
imagine will be the impact on female agency, the role
Mhm.
of women in the labor market?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to Africa, I know a lot of the work for women is honestly more so focused on a lot of these like more manual outputs, let's say cooking, caretaking, which at this point cannot be automated. We've
Mm,
seen countries like Japan try this more so for, let's say, like elder care, but it's really more
mm,
like emotional support than actual like the physical nature of changing someone's diaper or helping them shower. And I think
mm,
again, we're still very far from like any robot or automated system being able to do that. And so I think in
yeah,
Africa, like when it comes to this gendered nature, we might see AI start to maybe even bring up more work for these workers. When I did my dissertation research on community healthcare workers in
mm,
India, and all of them were women, and they mentioned that they would still actually have to learn how to operate and troubleshoot these AI models, which is something that they necessarily would not have to do
mm,
because they don't usually have to like troubleshoot, let's say, like a scale or a thermometer, for example. I think there's this added burden of AI that is still really uncovered in, let's say, computer science or even like economics research has to also focus on this gender lens and its intersectional nature of women and how work differs across context and
mm.
regions as well.
We also asked Alessandra, our last guest, about the question of language and of whose kind of knowledge is encoded in AI. Then kind of goes back to that same question in gender, whose voice is heard and what kinds of knowledges get encoded in AI. Are there kinds of cautions, whether this be as a person interested in knowledge from, as you call them, global majority countries, or as a person thinking about kind of gender encoded in these kinds of knowledges? Are there ways that we should be attentive to be cautious about the kinds of knowledge that AI offers us from these perspectives? And what kind of practices and processes can we participate in that kind of expand that AI voice and kind of domain of
Mhm.
knowledge?
Yeah, so I think it's really just respecting the rights of indigenous, so just like generally, communities themselves. There are existing communities particularly, like, in the Amazon and also across, I believe, like, Indonesia, that actually do not want to be contacted, and I think that there are also some languages that are not necessarily supposed to be spoken by those, like, outside those communities,
Mm,
and so if we're trying to encode this knowledge or just, like, language into AI
mm,
systems, it may be, like, fundamentally, let's say, like, going against the values that these communities hold. So I think this is something that has to be respected, and there has to be, like, obviously consent included in this process. I referenced the work of Te Hiki Media, which is a community in New Zealand doing a lot of great work on language preservation and has been very against, like, this co-optation of their labor and of their work and generally of their language as well,
mm,
because big tech companies have approached them trying to just profit off of the value of their data sets without, again, appropriately compensating or crediting them. And I think it's important that this mindset really be adopted across the world. And when it comes to like language inclusion, I think it's important. But again, like we have to understand what is right and also what is actually needed.
You mentioned talent earlier, so I wanted to refer to a tweet that I saw today. It's a tweet about a new economics NBR paper by leading scholars at Chicago. The title is Attention and Money is All You Need, Why Universities Are Struggling to Keep AI Talent. And you've just completed a PhD in computer science at one of the leading universities in the world. I see the finding of this paper is that the top 1% of AI scientists in industry now earn around $2 million a year. So, firstly, thank you for the hour that we've had.
Oh,
If I
thanks.
do the calculation very quickly, then it's really expensive. But secondly, if you're a talented young scholar in Africa, how should you think about this? Is computer science the kind of degree? Would you make a case for computer science now? And
mm.
secondly, how do universities combat this demand for their AI researchers? And that might be in computer science, it might be in economics. I can think of many fields where this would be a very attractive career.
Yeah, definitely. And so when it comes to the first question, I would say that I still do believe pursuing a computer science degree is very important. I actually went to a liberal arts college for undergrad. And as I like to
Mm.
say, I essentially took all the ologies. And I
Mm,
actually wanted to major or double major in anthropology as well, but didn't have the
mm,
time to take all the courses. And so I think it's
mm,
really important to have this fundamental understanding of the humanities, of the social sciences, is because, again, I think that we do see that these large companies hire psychologists, anthropologists, sociologists, economists. I was looking at the profile of LinkedIn's chief economist the other day, and her work is super impressive. We've seen like OpenAI recruit. I
Mm,
don't know if they've finalized the hiring for their chief economist yet, but I know they were recruiting for that position for a while. And so there's a lot of value, again, like these
mm,
other fields that complement computer science or are still like very different from computer science can bring to understanding artificial intelligence more broadly. And so I definitely encourage African students to maybe even, let's say, augment their existing studies if they're not a computer scientist or pursuing computer science
mm,
studies with just like a basic fundamental knowledge. Just take one coding course or one, I don't know, like logic course or something like that, just to again have this basic understanding. But it's not necessary to have a degree in computer science to work in AI.
mm,
And so I definitely want that to be understood. But again, I'm still very much so in favor of there
mm,
being expansions of, let's say, again, these tertiary programs to train more computer scientists on the continent and like at a PhD
mm,
level. Because again, there's a lot of research that hasn't been done on
mm,
AI in Africa that I
mm,
think like really needs to be done to expand the opportunities
mm,
for producing different kinds of models, but also just generally like improving the efficacy of them as well. In the US context, I feel like there is still this value that a lot of computer scientists hold in staying in academia. One, they can pursue like this independent, for the most part, research and not necessarily be at the whims of, let's say, like corporate priorities. And in many cases, you're making this big salary in a corporate setting, but you are in some cases limited in pursuing different research topics. You have to get approval for that. And then in many cases, the work that you're doing is always tied to some product. And I think that is limiting in a way for me personally. And this is why I haven't pursued roles in corporate settings at the moment. I am considering that in the future. After I finish up a fellowship, I'll be pursuing in the next year in government. But AI governance is something that became very popular when I was graduating. And if I went to a corporate setting, I wouldn't have been able to have the impact I had so early in my career.
mm,
Just as a follow up there on this universities thing. So imagine you're giving advice to the rectors of African universities, right? Clearly, we can't afford $2 million a year to the leading AI scientists. But what is the kind of strategic choices that we should make now?
mm,
So there's been a lot of investment and say like external programs and partnerships that have been really popping up across the continent. I sit on the advisory board of the AI Hub at UCT. We've had like organizations like IDRC, FCDO, CETA, and GIZ, and others really start to invest in funding African research. And so
mm,
I would say rectors, chancellors, presidents of universities across Africa really need to start doubling down and strengthening these partnerships to help improve funding pathways. I think obviously advocating to governments themselves to prioritize research funding versus like in Nigeria where a lot of the budget or money is being spent towards cars for politicians rather than investments in education and
mm,
health.
mm,
And so I think this is something that universities need to advocate for very heavily to reduce this reliance on foreign funding, but also ensure that our work, our research can be funded by the money that we pay taxes for
mm,
as well. And so I think
mm.
that's something I would strongly recommend universities to focus on.
So I want to come back to two things that you raised as central for governance in AI, which is you talk about the need for transparency and explainability. And I thought that this was really interesting. You have this piece titled Making AI Explainable in the Global South. And, this was my first introduction to explainable AI as a field. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that field and what that looks like in the Global South.
Yeah, so this work is a little bit dated, but definitely would love to come back and update it in the near future. But it's really focused on basically understanding how we can explain the decisions that AI models or systems or the outputs that they produce. Basically, more so like in accessible terms to non
Mm,
technical users. When it comes to AI explainability, a lot of the work is really focused on these technical mechanisms. My dissertation work focused on these tools like SHAP and LIME that focus on local explainability. So, focusing
mm,
on explaining like specific decisions and not just like general model thinking more broadly, which is like
mhm,
what the field of AI interpretability aims to really focus on. And the issue is that these tools or these methods are not, one, not accessible to non-technical users, but then when we consider the issues around or just like these context specific domains in low and middle income countries, there are also added challenges. And like In my case, when I was working in healthcare context, it was just even like the colors that were being used in these explainability methods that actually conflict with like medical domains. And then honestly, we ended up in one of the field studies I did in 2022, actually had the chance to go to India for this. We actually had to translate a lot of these terms into Hindi for the workers so
Mm.
they could actually understand what it was doing. But I think just generally like explainability is a little bit hard in this context because for example, when the healthcare workers weigh a baby or they, I don't know, get like a temperature, like they don't have an explanation of that. And so it's really like a mental model thing across fields, but also really just like making this specific to the needs of workers themselves.
Yeah, so I mean, I have the perception, and tell me if I'm wrong here, that, at some point, maybe with these kind of like large language models, but maybe in some of these systems in general, we lost, even the experts lost really knowing exactly what's going on to produce this final output. I perceive a tension between the kind of power of predictability based on just like the kind of kitchen sink of inputs, and then to really be able to say, this is the reason why that's happening to you. And I found in your discussion this interesting tension between maybe we build these models to try and predict as accurately as possible, but as humans, if decisions are going to be made on our behalves, we want to trust those decisions. We want to understand why certain decisions have been made. And so I wonder, how do you think about this? A lot of models are black box-esque, and these kind of mechanical interpretability kind of methods are trying to pull out certain features that explain certain elements, but even the experts are lost to be able to explain what's going on. So much complexity is encoded. That's great because it gives us something so powerful. On the other hand, the answer is now a mystery. It becomes like totally obscure to humans. How do we deal with that? And what does that mean for like trust and for use of the kind of knowledge that AI
Mm.
produces?
Yeah, it's definitely tough, and it's a hard question. I know companies like Anthropic are really doubling down on this explainability, interpretability
Mm.
question. I've seen them, hire a lot for this and also just
Mm.
produce academic research on this. And it's a tough problem because I think just generally due to the stochastic nature of AI models,
Yeah.
there's also research that's shown that it's honestly impossible to stop these models from producing false information. And so I think this has lots of implications for trust and reliability, particularly in these very sensitive use cases or settings as well. So I think that's why we need more research, particularly from different perspectives, the African perspective, and not to homogenize Africa as one place or one thing. But I think that once we understand different ways of understanding and reasoning, this may produce some of the breakthroughs that we're missing to unlock this black box for once.
Yeah.
How long do you think it will be before we've got an AI government? I mean, there are two aspects to that question. I guess the one is
Yeah.
technological and the other one is, as Jonathan has said, cultural, right? So, how long do you think it will take that governments are willing to outsource decisions to a model?
Yeah. I see that happening, and it really depends on the countries, maybe within the next 5 or so years, maybe
Mm.
3 years for some. I would say that the countries like the United Arab Emirates are really focused on integrating AI heavily into their
Mm.
processes. I
Mm.
believe they were like the first country to introduce like an AI focused specific minister in the world. I think this was in 2017 or so. And I know that they have also introduced like a lot of AI functions in government as
Mm.
well. So I see countries like that, like maybe 3 or 5 years. And when it comes to Africa, again, maybe like 10 to 15 years, because
Mm.
again, like the just general AI knowledge in these countries or capacity in government is still very low. And so I think it would make sense more so to bolster up this
Mm.
capacity rather than trying to outsource it to AI first. And so, yeah, it's a really hard to answer question.
Yeah, I was a bit facetious there, but I think it is important that these models are becoming so powerful that we can even imagine that this might be a question worth answering. I know that we're running out of time, but there's a couple of things that we still need to do, but both of them actually linked to AI. We've got this tradition on the podcast where we play you a song based on your research. So I'll do that soon. And I'm going to also ask you a ChatGPT generated question. But before that, I've got a very selfish question, and that is, to what extent are you using AI in your own life? Can you explain to us a 24-hour day in the life of Chinasa? Is it Claude Code? What tools are you using and how are you using it?
Yeah, so it's funny. I don't really code that a lot in my work. I did early on in my PhD. So very rarely do I use these devices and tools. I mean, I'm working on my personal website and it's definitely been helpful in like debugging some things, but like outsourcing it fully, no. When it comes to my work, like, it's more so like brainstorming, like, okay, like, I have these title options for a talk. This is something I did yesterday. Can you make it like more succinct? I tend to like have very long titles for like papers and talks, and I think that it's very helpful to like outsource that or just thinking or just revision side of things. I would say for copy editing, like I have Grammarly on my devices. They have come under some controversy, but I mean, it's very helpful. It actually made me a bit better writing more broadly because like now I anticipate some of the issues are going to like highlight as well. So that's been a plus for me. I would say Claude is my tool of choice when it comes to like AI. And again, I will broadly put in a document for, again, like broader copy editing to extend on what like Grammarly does, just to help ensure that my thoughts are like very succinct and tight. I've tried AI for, like, literature reviews. I'm still not there yet and seeing the big value of it, honestly. Just, like, a simple Google Scholar search works well for me now. I am working with a tool on a project at the Robic now to try to leverage AI and these large-scale automated reviews, and it's still, like, iffy to me, but I have to, like, work on it and just learn about it too.
Mm,
So, for me, it's more so, like, augmentation, but never, like, replacement of my
mm,
original thoughts, thinking, research,
mm,
etcetera.
Do you have a sense of what the next models will be like? I asked this because on Friday last week, I interviewed Tyler Cohen, and we'll have this as a supplementary podcast on the show. But he wasn't allowed to tell me anything about the models he's seen. So I'm very keen to hear, in what direction are these models moving? Is it just adding more speed? Is it adding more complexity? Or are there things that these things will be able to do that we can't yet imagine?
Yeah, so I think we're going to continue to see this trend towards like agentic AI and kind of, let's say, like encapsulate these different personas. I've seen a lot of conversations. Sayash Kapoor, I follow him on Twitter. I mean, he's had a bit of conversations over the past couple of days around like AI, let's say, like replacing a PhD student. And I think that we're, again, like these personas will be, let's say, like a banker or like an analyst, for example, or like a PhD student. So like you could, I don't know, automate a sample project from like the beginning, like to the end and produce like this a research paper. And then I guess let's say another field, maybe we're already starting to see this, but a full stack engineer, I think we'll start to see like those kind of personas start to pop up a bit more, where systems will actually be a little bit more competent in producing a project from scratch. And then also like even like the maintenance part of it, which is still something that I still see that humans are still very much so involved in when it comes to like these AI tools. But I think that's like the next phase of AI or like agentic AI more broadly. But I still think that AI cannot necessarily replace humans fully, particularly in these domains, because you still have to have someone have oversight and even in some cases like press the buttons that like activate the agentic AI in some cases. So
mm,
there's still a lot of human involvement needed.
mm. I've been thinking a lot about expertise and knowledge. And at the moment, you can still have the AI is validated by an expert. And so, in order to be the expert knower, has to be there alongside. Because if we once this starts to meet and exceed our experts, or once experts start to hand large portions of their work over to AI, this thing becomes either a peer or more advanced in certain areas. And in some ways, the vision of these kind of AI, super AIs, is all about that, something that's superior to human knowledge. But it makes me think that how would we even validate the knowledge if we didn't have a person that we trusted to do it? Or will we come to the point where we just have handed over trust? Do you have thoughts about expertise and human expertise versus AI expertise and kind of together when AI starts to exceed human expertise?
Yeah, again, the knowledge is interesting in a way that it's always being produced. And so that's why the value of
Mm,
human expertise is so high. And there are PhD students and some experts getting paid $100 to $200 an hour to just train and update these,
mm,
refine these respective AI systems. And again, because knowledge in a way is infinite, there will always, again, human expertise, it will still hold a lot of value to these models. And as I mentioned before, previously in our conversation, is that there's a lot of knowledge that's still locked down in these archives that humans only have access to. And that kind of value of this respective knowledge will never be replaced. And so I still see humans playing a big role in knowledge production, regardless of how it is encapsulated or integrated into AI systems.
mm.
So I'm going to play you a song. It was created by asking ChatGPT to read some of your papers and then
Oh, okay.
create lyrics. I was listening to Bruce Springsteen, I think, yesterday. And so I've decided I asked ChatGPT if Bruce Springsteen was born in Africa, what kind of music would he have made? And so here we go.
Down by the bypass where the new roads gleam, they raise a data center out of a minister's dream. Silver pipes, blue lights, guards at the gate, kids still carrying buckets where the taps don't run straight. A billboard said the future's here in a borrowed neon tongue, but the clinic lost a nurse and the school roof still come undone. A dust the mothers wash, the cooling towers glow like a spaceship landing somewhere it didn't know. Kigali in April, the dancers moved in chrome. Coders, ministers, founders, talking of a continent of its own. 49 signatures on a declaration page, while the war kept muttering just beyond the stage. Men in clean shirts said the old days were done, that the algorithm's coming like a second sun. But in the market, the traders laugh low and dry. They've heard 100 futures coming past them by, and the machine keep humming through the long hard night, saying faster, faster, everything will be alright. But who gets the power and who pays the price? Who drinks the dust? Who sells the paradise? We don't need a god, build out a code and wire. We need light in the schoolhouse, water, truth and fire. If the future's coming, let it answer to us all, or it's just another empire with a cleaner wall. A boy in Lagos heard a voice note on his phone. A candidate promising the votes were already sown. In Johannesburg, a fake man spoke in a foreign face, promising sanctions, panic, one more crooked race. In Ouagadougou, they shared those shining clips. Strong man in a language that never crossed his lips. And somewhere in Libreville, a stiff old broadcast frame turned rumor into gunfire, and nobody knew the name. They say the chips will save us, say the mottos will be wise, say hunger, war and climate bend before electric eyes. But I seen landlords smiling where the housing funds were cut, and a hospital war closing while the ministers strut. I seen river water thinning.
We'll stop it there. Chinasa, what do you think about your research turned into song?
Yeah, this is so interesting. Like when I saw the 49, I was like, oh, okay, this is like the Africa AI Declaration. Okay, I was like, okay, this is interesting. The lyrics were really good. That was something that impressed me. Like it definitely has a very strong message. When it comes to AI-generated music, I honestly am against like this replication of human creativity and like song and particularly AI art too. But this is, I think, probably the first AI-generated song I listened to like willingly. But yeah. I don't listen to Bruce Springsteen a lot, so but I'm sure it sounds close to him.
I don't actually think it does. That's partly why I asked if Bruce Springsteen
Yeah.
was born in Africa.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And it actually ties up nicely with the question also that ChatGPT asked you. So maybe I should actually ask that question. If you had to design an AI system trained only on African histories and languages and norms and culture and art, so there's no waste in data at all, what would it understand better than today's models? And what might it get completely wrong?
I feel like the question's already answered in a little bit because we have a better understanding, of this context-specific, nature of how, I don't know, like Africans operate in their respective daily lives. And so obviously that's something that would be improved. Something that it might get wrong, there's still like a lot of like niche subcultures that aren't necessarily also encapsulated on mainstream forums. People, I know there's different dialects. Some, for example, like Swahili and English Sheng. Like I think like when it comes to that kind of thing, like it would definitely not perform as well. So again, because it's really hard to encapsulate all this knowledge in AI models as well, but it would perform better than what we see in the mainstream already.
Chinasa, Okolo, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And good luck with what seems to be really important work for the future and tough career decisions, I can imagine. So good luck with that. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks again with the final episode of the second season of our Long Walk podcast. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Season 2 of the Our Long Walk podcast. We'd love to hear from you. What's the one idea from today's conversation that changed your outlook? Do you have a burning question you'd like to explore, or perhaps a guest you'd love to hear from? Get in touch with us by sending an email to johan@ourlongwalk.com. That's JOHAN@ourlongwalk.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. You can follow us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'd love your feedback. Visit us at ourlongwalk.com. Follow our LinkedIn page for updates, new episodes, and additional links.
This series is made possible by the Chair in Economics, History and Policy at Stellenbosch University. Visit leapstellenbosch.org for more information about our research unit in economic history.
Thanks to Leap researcher Kelsey Lemon, who provided helpful background research. Thanks also to the team at Voice Note Productions for helping to make this podcast. Our producer is Fasti Karlitz. Sound design and editing is done by Andre Burnett. Nkosi Johan.
Danke, Jonathan. Join us next time for another episode of Our Long Walk.
See you then.
Cheers.
Down by the bypass where the new roads gleam, they raise a data center out of a minister's dream. Silver pipes, blue lights, guards at the gate, kids still carrying buckets where the taps don't run straight. A billboard said the future's here in a borrowed neon tongue, but the clinic lost a nurse and the school roof still come undone. A dust the mothers wash, the cooling towers glow like a spaceship landing somewhere it didn't know. Kigali in April, the dancers moved in chrome. Coders, ministers, founders, talking of a continent of its own. 49 signatures on a declaration page, while the war kept muttering just beyond the stage. Men in clean shirts said the old days were done, that the algorithm's coming like a second sun. But in the market, the traders laugh low and dry. They've heard 100 futures coming past them by, and the machine keep humming through the long hard night, saying faster, faster, everything will be alright. But who gets the power and who pays the price? Who drinks the dust? Who sells the paradise? We don't need a god, build out a code and wire. We need light in the schoolhouse, water, truth and fire. If the future's coming, let it answer to us all, or it's just another empire with a cleaner wall. A boy in Lagos heard a voice note on his phone. candidate promising the votes were already sown. In Johannesburg, a fake man spoke in a foreign face, promising sanctions, panic, one more crooked race. In Ouagadougou, they shared those shining clips. Strong man in a language that never crossed his lips. And somewhere in Libreville, a stiff old broadcast frame turned rumor into gunfire, and nobody knew the name. They say the chips will save us, say the mottos will be wise, say hunger, war, and climate ban before electric eyes. But I seen landlords smiling where the housing funds were cut, and a hospital war closing while the ministers strut. I seen river water thinning for a server farm upstream. I seen men dig cobalt for somebody else's dream. I seen the labeler at midnight training somebody's crown for a wage so thin it disappears before the sun goes down. Now a girl in Kisumu with a cracked screen phone runs a small model local built close to home. Not grand, not godlike, not soul is destiny. Just weather for the farmers and forms for the clinic free. A teacher in Barada checks lessons in Luganda. A co-op maps the floods before they break Rwanda. Small lights, real lights under public hands. Not heaven dropping down, but people making plans. And the machines keep humming through the long hard night, saying faster, faster, everything will be alright. But who gets the power and who pays the price? Who writes the code? Who lives the sacrifice? We don't need a throne for every billionaire. We need tools that speak the languages people wear. If the future's coming, let it answer to us all, or it's just another empire with a cleaner wall. So slow that train, just enough to change the track. Keep the promise, leave the fever. Don't go racing blind and black. Let the universities build, let the unions have a say. Let the villages decide what the wires are to carry. Let the state be more than muscle for a private gold rush game. Let the measure of advancement be more than size and fame. Because a fast machine in a broken world only teaches broken men new ways to rule. And dawn comes red over the satellite dish, over the mind dump, the ballot box, the unkept wish, over the child who still believes tomorrow can be made. Not bought offshore, not forced, not digitally displayed. The future